Hello YouTube, I'm David, and welcome back to Raw History. So we're all familiar with the early birds of history, the ancient Egyptians and the ancient Greeks, but this week I want to look at what came before. What came before Stonehenge and the pyramids? What came before writing? What came before monarchies? And what came before organised religion? This week, we're going to look at the humans that came before the invention of history. It's going to be fun. So we're constantly told that history starts with civilization. But to be honest, civilization is just a really arbitrary starting point. I mean, yeah, it's a lot easier for us to study history after the advent of writing and buildings that last, but that doesn't mean that everything that came before should be relegated to sub-history or prehistory. Our collective story doesn't begin with the ancient Egyptians or the ancient Mesopotamians or the Indus Valley civilizations. It starts with much more humble beginnings. This guy is Omo1, and he's going to be the star of our video today. Now, Omo1 wasn't a great god king. We don't even know what his real name was, if he had a name, and to be 100% honest, I'm not sure that he was even a he. But where Omo1 does excel is that he is the first example of an anatomically modern human being. Now, anatomically modern human being doesn't mean that he was an early hominid or a Neanderthal or a Homo erectus that was evolving into a Homo sapien. No, he was, for all intents and purposes, one of us. He wasn't even just a Homo sapien, he was a Homo sapien sapien. He was us to such an extent that if somehow we got a time machine and travelled back in time, picked him up and raised him in our societies, he would be undistinguishable from the other 7 billion people he shares our world with. He was as much one of us as Napoleon or Obama or Beyonce. The fantastically named Omo1 is the earliest fossil that we have found of a human being that lived and died with the same basic ideas and desires that we have, except Omo1 lived and died 195,000 years ago. Just to give you a little bit of perspective on that, Stonehenge was built around about 5,000 years ago. So why doesn't my friend Omo1 get considered a historical figure? I mean, yeah, it's true, we really don't know much about him, but we don't know much about people like Spartacus or Jesus, but they're generally considered, at least by most, to be historical figures, right? Omo1 lived in a time before civilization, but that doesn't mean he's not a part of history. Starting the history books with the ancient Egyptians is like watching Breaking Bad but starting at season 3 just because that's when you happen to buy a television. You get some of the story, but you don't get any of the important context that makes it meaningful. "Polished it last night," said Cedric, grinning. Harry looked down at his own. He could see finger marks all over it. He gathered a fistful of robe from his knee and tried to rub it surreptitiously. Several sparks shot out of the end of it. Fleur Delacour gave him a very patronising look, and so he desisted. This is an exercise in the importance of context. Starting the history books with civilization just doesn't tell us the whole story. And although it's not quite as hilarious as Harry Potter, our ancestors were doing a lot of really important things before history as we know it began. So what were humans doing for 189,000 years? Well, a lot of people would say we just spent our time sharpening flints for 95% of human history, and there's really nothing exciting about that. And yeah, it's true, we sharpened a lot of flint, but in between times, we did an awful lot more. Our ancestors migrated out of Africa, we populated 6 of the 7 continents, we made some of the most significant technological advances of all time, we tamed fire, we pioneered music and art, we developed complex languages, we survived a mass extinction, and then we caused another mass extinction. We adapted to every conceivable environment in the world, we mined metal out of the earth, we developed social hierarchies, we invented gods to worship and enemies to kill. We passed knowledge down through the generations, we hunted giant beasts, and we made one simple yet unbelievably radical decision that changed the nature of human history forever. And we did all of this without building a single city or writing down a single word. So Omo 1 and all his friends, the early humans, were living about 195,000 years ago in Africa, or in modern-day Ethiopia to be exact. Actually, there are some new ideas that are contesting the out-of-Africa theory, but a lot of the evidence is shaky and they're less than perfect. So for now, we say humans started out in Africa. Omo 1 certainly did. So for thousands of years, we lived as hunter-gatherers in small, moving, nomadic communities. Although the life was very, very simple and basic by our standards today, little practices were beginning to emerge that no animal had ever done before, but we still do to this day. For example, humans started to bury their dead. And not just to avoid disease, we put flowers on the gravestones of our loved ones. This is not instinct, this is ritual. And it demonstrates that humans had concepts and beliefs about death and life after death. It had no evolutionary advantage, but we did it anyway. And we also see jewellery emerge in this period. Men and women wore items that didn't protect them or keep them warm, but it said something about their personalities or their beliefs. It was an external symbol of their internal character. Because these communities of hunter-gatherers were relatively small, it doesn't make sense to talk about things like governance or currency or states at this point. Hunters did not go out and then sell their produce to the rest of the group as capitalists would today, but they shared it around with their family and community in exchange for shelter and protection and a group to belong to. I do think it's interesting that left-wing revolutionary ideas of a socialist utopia is basically what made up 98% of human history. I'm not saying life was perfect for these early hunter-gatherers. Raids, drought, disease, wild animals, starvation, infanticide, and unpredictability all made up the nuts and bolts of life at this time, and they all culminated about 75,000 years ago in the near total extinction of our species. So between 69 and 77,000 years ago, in present-day Sumatra, there was a huge volcanic catastrophe known as the Toba supereruption that plunged the world into a massive volcanic winter and may have contributed to the Ice Age. In the centuries following the Toba supereruption, our species dwindled to 10,000 individuals. 10,000! So let's just give that a little bit of perspective. The tiny-ass country of Liechtenstein in Europe has 37,000 people living in it. The tiny-ass capital of Greenland, one of the least populated countries in the world, still has 17,000 people in it. Wyoming is the least populated state in America, and Riverton is the 9th most populated town in that state, and it still has more than 10,000 people in it. There are more people in Riverton, Wyoming than there were human beings in the world following the Toba supereruption. And yet, from that 10,000 emerged all 7 billion of us. So humans are unimaginably resilient, and like a virus, or I don't know, more optimistically, the Beatles, we spread around the world. Okay, so this is a map of the world as we most commonly see it, with the north at the top and the south at the bottom. And from this map, it's quite difficult to understand how humans from Africa managed to travel to the rest of the Earth. I mean, that's a lot of ocean to cross. How did people get from Africa to South America? Did they swim the Pacific? Spoiler alert, we did not. But if we turn the map around like this, then it's suddenly much easier for us to see how a small group of mammals could have spread out of Africa and occupied almost every continent on Earth, especially when we consider that the northernmost fringes of this map were covered in ice at the time. Okay, so that was the Paleolithic era, or the Old Stone Age. And we're going to move on now to the Mesolithic eras and the Neolithic eras, which means Middle Stone Age and New Stone Age. Just a little heads up, and you may have got this from Omo 1, historians are not abundantly imaginative at naming things. But the Mesolithic era started about 20,000 years ago, and by now humans had spread out around the world and we had bounced back big time. We were living in much larger communities and much more complex interactions were beginning to emerge between these groups. Some of these interactions were harmless and peaceful, like trade, and some of them were violent and bloody, like raids. Hey, that rhymes. Humans were also starting to develop more exciting tools, like bows and arrows and canoes. Anthropologists and archaeologists kind of categorize this tool development in different modes, which are really boring and I'm not going to go into them, but if you are keeping track and you are interested, we're now entering mode 5, which is cool because this is the first time that we get composite tools emerging. So composite tools are tools that are made out of more than one raw material. For example, a Paleolithic axe may look like this, just a sharpened piece of stone, but a Mesolithic axe in the mode 5 method of development would look more like this, and it would be a lot more useful to the people using it. Now, just a side note, but it is really important to be aware that contrary to popular belief, using tools does not set humans apart from other animals. Homo habilis means handyman, and they were a hominid alive around 2 million years ago that used tools, despite being nowhere near as advanced cognitively as we are. And other animals, such as apes, birds, dolphins, elephants, octopuses, and rodents, all use tools to get the jobs done. The only difference is that whereas an ape might use a stone to crack a nut, we use iPads, so yeah. Now when we think of the stereotype of cavemen plodding around in the Ice Age with Neanderthals and hunting mammoths and sabre-toothed tigers, it's usually this Mesolithic era that we're picturing. However, our ancestors were still missing one very important thing that would kickstart civilization and give us the social structures that we have today. This important thing came about in the Neolithic era. So if you remember earlier in the video, I said,
we made one simple yet unbelievably radical decision that changed the nature of human history forever.
And we finally got to the point where this decision was made. Now, I'm not saying this was a conscious decision on the part of one individual, but it was a very gradual yet significant shift in the nature of human societies. So hunter-gatherers have dominated this video so far, but that way of life all began to change with the advent of, drumroll please, agriculture. Okay, so agriculture doesn't seem like the biggest thing to ever happen, ever. And it can be quite hard for us to get behind farming, unless that's your thing, in which case, hey. But farming really did change everything. I know I've said this a lot, but I cannot hammer the point home enough. Agriculture changed everything. So the Neolithic period started around 9,000 years ago, and we see a shift away from the nomadic hunter-gatherers towards settlement. That's right, as in stagnant, non-moving settlement. Now I should point out that not everybody opted for this settled way of life, and we still do have hunter-gatherer communities today, but they don't have YouTube, so... Now staying in one place does have its advantages for humans. Like, it's much easier to build a community, and it's a lot safer for infants to not be travelling around all the time. Plus, if you've got a really bountiful spot on a river, then you don't have to give it up when you move on. But there are also disadvantages to settling. For example, what the gatherers gather is finite, and will run out, and what the hunters hunt doesn't settle down, and so when the herds migrate away, the people go hungry. The solution, agriculture, is to control the things being hunted and gathered and to bring them into the settlement. And thus, voila, in the Neolithic era we get crops and domesticated animals, and it's all thanks to agriculture. So the first settlements all emerged independently of each other in a variety of places, but they all had one thing in common, and that was rivers. Rivers are the absolute best, because that's where the land is fertile and trade is super easy on a river. And with some rivers, their flooding can be predicted, such as the Nile. So early farmers in that area learnt the best times of year to sow their crops and the best times of year to reap them. That's seasonal agriculture. By about 5,000 years ago, we had recognized states along the Nile in ancient Egypt, the Tigris and the Euphrates in Mesopotamia, the Yangtze in China, and the Indus Valley in the Indus Valley civilizations. In less than 4 millenniums, humans went from this to this. Good job, agriculture! So agriculture was the dawn of settlement, and settlement was the birthplace of civilization. I'm going to have to stop now, but I'll talk about these early civilizations in more detail next week, where we'll discuss how rudimentary states turned into international superpowers. So thanks for watching, and please keep the discussion going in the comment section below. And for this week's head scratcher, if a baby's head emerges at 11:59 PM, but its feet don't emerge until 12:01 AM, what day is the baby's birthday? Thanks again for watching, and if you like what you've watched, don't forget to hit like and hit subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Have a great week, and next week we will talk about the powerful and great early civilizations. I'll see you there.